What is up, Marlborough community? Hi, I hope you had a good weekend. I'm currently filming this on Sunday afternoon since the day after Halloween. I had an interesting Halloween to say the least, but I hope you guys had a lot of fun. I hope you were safe and you wore your masks, and I hope that you were able to enjoy some semblance of Halloween. But you are watching this Monday morning, which means that tomorrow is the election. So we have an election-filled ASM for you guys today. First, we have a video from the history department, and they're going to be connecting Marlborough's core values to the general election, so that's going to be super cool. And then we have a video from the students and the faculty, which is based on the questions that were sent out to you guys last week. So super fun ASM, and please make sure you tune into the election tomorrow. It's going to be historic, and you're not going to want to miss it. That's all from me. Let's get started. I'll see you guys later.
Thank you, Micah. And thank you for that high level of energy that you're bringing every Monday morning. I know that we all appreciate it. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Mr. Allen, and I'm the Department Head of History and Social Sciences. And you can imagine that the election has been on the forefront of all of our minds, especially this semester. In our history classes, even though they're virtual, we're constantly talking about how we are living history right now, that what we're experiencing are future pages in history textbooks. And while that's exciting, it could also be terrifying to many. And tomorrow is yet another turning point in our history. For example, no matter who wins, if it's Biden or if it's Trump, one of them very well could accumulate enough, like a record number of votes in our national history that would put them in the Oval Office. And if Donald Trump wins re-election, then he would be the oldest man to be re-elected. He would also be the first president to be re-elected after impeachment. And he would be the only president to win both terms without ever having won the popular vote at all. Fascinating times. And yet, it feels like we've been here before. This moment feels very familiar. 4 long years ago, the history department decided that we wanted to document that moment in Marlborough's history on the eve of such an important election. So on campus, we found this little space on the second floor, a space that if you're a student, you've probably never seen before. And we called it the Speak Out Video Booth. And inside, you'd find this white plush chair, an explosion of red, white, and blue paraphernalia. And we encouraged anyone who wanted to sit in that chair and share their thoughts and feelings with us to talk about the issues that concern them the most in that moment on the eve of the 2016 election. Looking back at that video now, 4 years later, is interesting. In fact, let's take a little look.
I think I'm surprised overall. I think I overestimated the extent of which American people are educated.
Now I just kind of want November 8th to come and go.
It makes me feel like I've been watching an SNL skit for the past year and a half, and it's really getting old.
One of the jobs that presidents have is nominating Supreme Court justices, and the next president is likely to be able to nominate more than one.
This year, even though we're remote, the history department asked you to share once again your thoughts, your feelings, your concerns with us, so we can take another snapshot of a Marlborough historic moment and to look back at it 10, 20, 30 years later as a bit of a time capsule. Thank you for sharing your video submissions. Here's what we've received.
How am I feeling with the election next week? I'm actually feeling optimistic because I spend a lot of my time talking to voters and working to get out the vote, and those conversations have been really positive.
I am feeling anxious. I am feeling hopeful. I am feeling scared. It's a very complex time for emotions.
Hopeful. I'm trying to stay positive.
I'm scared and really, really nervous.
I am terrified. I am so scared, but we are all, I think as so many of you, we are putting our fear into action. We are phone banking. We are scared, but we are putting our head down and we are doing the work, and that is super exciting.
I do not know what I'm going to do if the person I do not support is elected.
When I think about the future of our world and our access to water and food, I do get a little bit worried.
I don't think you can predict anything that's going to happen. I think I'm stressed.
Exhausted.
The reason why it's so anxiety inducing is because there's so much at risk and there's so many people's rights at risk.
I'm feeling sad because the nature of these campaigns has been just so disappointing.
I just think we should be better than this.
The most important issue for me is promoting equal rights for all people. That includes like addressing systemic inequality, racial inequalities in the U.S., and like promoting women's rights for LGBTQ plus people.
For me, I think, I don't know if it's necessarily an issue or not, but making sure that, you know, our next president supports the Black community.
Being a person of color and like a woman of color, I know how like a lot of these topics can relate to one another, and there's a lot of intersectionality between them. For example, like socioeconomic status, healthcare, and like race are like 3 different topics that are important, but a lot of them are intertwined. Like a lot of minorities tend to have worse healthcare.
I have to say immigration.
Climate change or women's reproductive rights.
Our democracy.
I think democracy in general is kind of at stake here.
I'm also concerned about LGBTQ rights, healthcare, marriage equality,
social justice, and the environment.
COVID-19 is the most important issue.
Definitely climate change and women's reproductive rights.
Healthcare.
COVID-19 and women's reproductive rights.
The most important issue is just how we use science and our understanding of science and how we use science to make our decisions.
Climate change.
Climate change.
Climate change.
Everything is the most important issue in this election.
Hi, I'm Dr. Atwell. When the history department was thinking about what we wanted to share with you, the Marlborough community, about tomorrow's election during this ASM, well, frankly, we were a little nervous. After all, this has been an incredibly polarizing election season, made all the more volatile and challenging by the influence of social media, the COVID pandemic, and concerns about election legitimacy and voter suppression. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. And I don't know about you, but all of this uncertainty has made me incredibly anxious for this election season to just be over, as well as apprehensive about what might follow. But at the same time, this election is a moment for us to step back and reflect on what being able to participate in an election really means. The act of voting itself is symbolic of so many of our core values as a society, the very things that ought to unite us rather than divide us. And voting is a right that had to be fought for by so many people, both in the United States and around the globe. So being an engaged, informed, and active citizen, whether or not you can vote, is one small but profoundly important step that each of us can take to help create a more inclusive future, regardless of who wins this particular election. So for this ASM, members of the History Department decided to share what voting and civic engagement means to them in light of Marlborough's own core values. Stand with others, champion inclusion, aim high, trust in yourself, act with integrity, be kind, and cultivate purpose.
Whether or not you can currently vote, democratic elections offer all of us the opportunity to reflect on who we are and to reimagine who we could be. It is an opportunity to ask ourselves what America is and who counts in the asking. The risk of democracy is that not everyone gets counted. And we realize that not everyone shares our vision of America. But that is not, although sometimes it can most certainly feel like it, a cause for despair. Rather, it is a call to democratic work. And a precondition of that work is that we regard each other enough to count each of us as full and equal members of the world we hope to achieve. That might include people whose political affiliations are not ours. It might include people whose racial, religious, sexual, gender identifications are not ours. It might also include people whose social economic status we do not share. A democratic life, the philosopher Chris LeBron, channeling James Baldwin, tells us, it's not simply about being free to vote. More fundamentally, it is about being counted, being able to be counted in a community of peers in which the possibility of friendship is genuine. Understood this way, the statement, "We the people," is not simply a declaration of democratic power, but a promise of friendship and inclusion as well. Championing inclusion is democratic work, and to champion inclusion now and after this election is to always hold the count in sight and to trouble its borders by offering the promise of friendship.
Hi, Marlborough. This presidential election season has been notably contentious. There has been no shortage of vitriol in our political spaces, and it must seem sometimes that Democrats and Republicans won't ever agree on anything ever again. It might be difficult for some of you to imagine that people with different political beliefs could ever be friends or even have a productive conversation. But as members of the Marlborough community, it is important to remember that this isn't true. One of our core values is being kind, not just to your friends or to those with whom you agree, but with everyone you interact with. A good example for all of us is the now famous friendship between former President George W. Bush and former First Lady Michelle Obama. Though these two have significantly different political beliefs, their friendship is both enduring and conspicuous. You have likely seen pictures of the two sitting next to one another, joking together, and even embracing. Ms. Obama once called President Bush her partner in crime, while President Bush remarked, "That's what's so weird about society today, the surprise that people on opposite sides of the political spectrum can actually like each other." Of course, it shouldn't be a surprise. We should strive to replicate this kindness with all those with whom we disagree. Only kindness will help heal the deep partisan divide from which we are currently suffering.
This election season has made me reflect on the ways we can each commit to showing courage on a personal level, no matter what the outcome on November 3rd. What is the best way for us to dig deep and discover our potential as leaders? Dr. Sands would say, follow your passion and find something that brings you joy. I think this is great advice. Bring your skills to serve our community. Maybe it won't be obvious this week or month or even this year, but maybe in the next decade or over the coming generations, you will find a role that speaks to your passion, skill set, and drive. This will be my first time to vote in a presidential election after becoming a citizen 3 years ago. Looking over the ballot with an eye to voting, it is the many candidates running for a variety of offices, many who are just starting their political careers, that have made me think of Americans who have been in the news over the past few years for their long-running service in their areas of expertise. The late Representative John Lewis, Senator John McCain, and Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg spent their lives leading in different areas of the government, spanning generations and many administrations, fighting for what they believed in, right up until their passing. Dr. Anthony Fauci has been a medical advisor to every US president since Reagan. These Americans were and are in it for the long haul, and because they trust or trusted in their ability to affect change through the work they believed in. They used their life experiences to inform their work and affect change, whether that was being a freedom rider, a prisoner of war, or a woman in the male-dominated field of law for her time. With these inspirational figures in mind, and the many obstacles they faced over the course of their careers, I know we can all work to be self-reliant and resilient in the face of any setbacks. Think of the long game. John Lewis knew this when he said in 2019, "I have said this before and I will say it again. The vote is precious. It is almost sacred. It is the most powerful, non-violent tool we have in a democracy."
Acting with integrity is something we should do every day, even when, and really especially when, it is difficult to do. To understand this word integrity, we have to understand that it comes from the Latin, meaning intact or whole. It is the same root that gives us words like integer and integrated, concepts that depend on oneness, indivisibility, a thing that stands in and of itself, complete. To act with integrity, therefore, means that we have to align our thoughts, our words, and our actions with our moral principles. It means that we have to be honest with ourselves and honest with others. It means that we have to think about our motivations and then align those motivations with our actions and our principles. It means that we have to have a great deal of self-respect and exercise a great deal of self-control. When I think about integrity, I think about my dad, a man who I greatly, greatly admired and also often disagreed with. He was a true civil servant. He was a colonel in the Marine Corps, and he worked in the district attorney's office. And it was his work as a district attorney that brought him into contact with now vice presidential nominee Kamala Harris. When my father passed away in 2017, Kamala Harris wrote our family a letter. And in this letter, she talked about my dad as being a champion for dignity, justice, and equality for all. My dad and Kamala Harris were on opposite sides of the political spectrum. And I know that in their time in the district attorney's office, that they had their fair share of disagreements. And yet they were able to strengthen our nation because they respected one another and they both acted with integrity. And at this time when our nation is so divided, it is our duty to act with integrity. It is through modeling integrity that we can rise above disagreement and we can come together for the best, for the whole, for the integrity of the nation. It is really precisely when people do not act upon sound moral principles that we have to intensify our own efforts and act with integrity.
Stand with others. What does stand with others mean in election time, especially when people are actually standing with others in long, long lines that seem to stretch for blocks, even miles, which is a testimony to their commitment to voting, but also a sad reflection on the state of our voting apparatus and equipment. To me, standing with others during election times means not only supporting the right to vote, but celebrating the right to vote with others as a community, as an essential part of a robust democracy. Even in the most intense national elections like the one that we're about to have, there are always about 1/3 to 40% of the population that don't vote. And they don't vote because they don't feel like voting makes any difference in their lives, or they have a lot of obligations and they don't feel like what they have to do to vote, outweighs any consequences voting might have. And I'd really, as an American, as a supporter of democracy, I'd really like to change that. So for me, to sum things up, standing with others, like looking into the future, would mean making voter registration automatic for all 18-year-olds, so that it doesn't involve any complicated procedure, IDs, et cetera, et cetera. This is probably the most important one for me: instituting a national holiday for voting, preferably backed up to a weekend, so there can be 3 days of voting. And anything that we could do to roll into that kind of national holiday, a sense of celebration of democracy, a reminder to ourselves of ritual bonding that we're all committed to the idea of democracy, even if we have opposing political views or disagree on certain things. That, to me, is celebrating democracy and standing with others.
After the election, you can aim high by staying informed beyond November 3rd and beyond the presidential race. Whether or not the candidate you support wins, inform yourself about what else was decided on election day and follow the impact of it. The president's power is limited, and there are many other avenues in our system for political action. Every seat in the House and 1/3 of the seats in the Senate are up for re-election. Look at those results. Look for role models within those results who believe in and fight for what you believe in. Follow their impact. Look for the bills they're proposing and the discussions in the House and the Senate, or just follow that congressperson on Instagram, or other social media. You can also aim high by following the results at a state or local level. In California, we have the opportunity to vote on measures directly at the state level. This isn't the case for all states. This election, we're voting on affirmative action, voting rights, and other various resource allocation measures. In addition, many people who are up for election at the city level might align with your views or might be trying to replace somebody who doesn't align with your views. I believe that whether or not your candidate wins, you can find hope through this election. In addition, as you expand your understanding of political systems, you will find ways to build hope through other means of change than just the presidential election. While the presidency might be at the top of everyone's minds right now, you can aim high by digging into the issues you care about and informing yourself on the various ways politicians are working to fight for those issues.
When I think about cultivating purpose, I think about the ways our lives intersect and impact one another. I think about reform movements and uprisings. I think about the founding of nations and utopian communities. I think about resistance and conviction. The folks who have committed to their purpose when it didn't seem feasible are the ones who have effected great change in this world. And I think the word purpose carries this connotation that you need to know exactly what you want to do for your life's work, or that you somehow have to have it all figured out so you can help humanity. But it may be more simple, even deeper than that. You exist, and your commitment to being your best self benefits us all. Every action and every contribution matters in the big picture. Imagine if everyone committed to a cause they felt strongly about. The roles are limitless, but there is an importance in each one. Discussing ideas with people, informing others on social media, sharing stories and experiences, planning and organizing, making food for the sustainability of the people involved, donating money to those you trust to carry out the work, volunteering time, creating a solution for a problem, creating laws, or becoming a politician of yourself, maybe even the next president of the United States. And so much more. When we understand how we treat ourselves and how we treat each other impacts our happiness and our livelihood, it becomes more apparent that empathy and action are necessary. Honoring our purpose is necessary. I want everyone to imagine how your ideal society would look if you could change it with a magic wand at this moment. Yet there is no magic wand, and there are no magic people. There are only individuals like you and me, individuals who know that a circumstance or a moment doesn't define them. This election is a small puzzle piece in the big picture. We have our whole lives ahead of us to embody the change we seek from others. I know that our purpose, our existence, goes beyond this moment. And I look forward to seeing the ways we cultivate that purpose for our community and for our world.
Hi, everyone. Election day has arrived. We will know the results of some races tomorrow. Others may not be confirmed for weeks. In any case, it's incumbent upon each of us to start thinking about what we're going to do after the election. First, you must prepare yourself for the possibility that your preferred candidate might lose. Polls use statistical models to predict the turnout of different demographic groups, but sometimes those predictions are off, as they were in 2016. This is also an unprecedented election. The number of early votes and mail-in votes, the number of legal challenges to voting procedures, plus the effect of voting during a pandemic, make the outcome especially difficult to foresee. Remember what human rights activist Gary Kasparov has said. It is a privilege not to know in advance who will win an election, because that proves that it's dependent on the votes of the people rather than decided for us in advance. In the meantime, you should resolve yourself to the notion that the election is the beginning of the work, not the end of it. The price we pay for living in a free country is that the work of citizenship is never done. If the candidate you support wins the election, you will have to hold them to their promises and continue to build support for the policies you believe in. Writing or calling elected representatives, speaking out on issues you feel passionately about, and working to support the next round of candidates in the midterm elections. should all be on your agenda for the day after the election and beyond. But the real character test will come if your candidate loses. When the election results are finalized, we'll all feel the joy or sorrow of victory or defeat. Many members of our community will be personally affected by the outcome of the election, and all Americans, and indeed the whole world, has a stake in who America is and how it exercises its power. That said, many members of our community also have forms of privilege that help to insulate us from the ramifications of the election. If you are disappointed in the result, will you stop showing up to fight for the people who can't fight for themselves, because in our society they're powerless or marginalized? Will you use despair as an excuse to stop speaking out on the issues you care most about, the issues that define who you are? Will you fixate on what's happening to you, or will you find a way to be of service to the people you love and the people you'll never meet whose lives nevertheless depend on you? If your candidate loses, you may feel deeply sad, frustrated, or disillusioned. It's okay to feel those emotions, but ultimately you will have a choice about what to do in response to them. And that choice will say something important about who you are. Make sure that choice is worthy of you and worthy of your community. I believe that all of you are capable of finding the best versions of yourselves, even when times are hard or hope seems far away. Thanks for all your passionate advocacy during this election. It's been truly inspiring, and good luck on Tuesday.
The year I started teaching history was the 2000 election, Al Gore versus George W. Bush. It came down to Florida, where Bush was ahead by only 537 votes, and there was a legal battle over the recounting of the votes. It took over a month to resolve that election, and no one really saw that coming. This year we know that there's a good chance that we won't know the outcome on election night. More people than ever are voting by mail due to the pandemic, and mail ballots take longer to count. There's also a strong possibility that the race could be called early, or that the fortunes of both candidates may seem to swing back and forth as the counting continues. If the election does end up being very close, it may take days or even weeks to know the result. Pennsylvania, for example, will likely be crucial in a close election, and election officials there estimate that the overwhelming majority of votes might not be counted until Friday. If the election process does drag on, you may find yourself not being able to look away from the news and social media and becoming anxious and exhausted. That's how many of us felt back in 2000, and that was before social media. So pace yourself. Allow yourself to take breaks from the news and from social media. Go for a walk, read a book, disconnect for a while. And when you do check back in, be on the lookout for misinformation. Unfortunately, there's likely to be a lot of that. On the My Marlborough Elections LibGuide, you can find a great list of fact-checking websites that can help you sort out fact from fiction. Follow the news and stay informed, but pace yourself and take care of yourself.
One of the reasons I got involved in registering and educating students around voting and voting rights is because in previous elections, youth turnout, and youth is defined, I think, as like 18 to 24, sometimes 18 to 29, is increasingly the largest voting bloc in the country. It's certainly the largest voting bloc in Los Angeles County, but traditionally these groups vote in the lowest numbers. And they do that for a wide range of reasons. And so I would urge people to get involved, especially young people, to get involved after the election by making sure your friends are registered to vote and know how to vote. And then also issues-based advocacy is really important. So if you're passionate about the climate crisis, you could volunteer with the Sunrise Movement. If you are passionate about voting rights, there are many, many organizations that advocate for increased access to ballot and voter education. You might have a political candidate that you really like, and they might be running for office in 2022 or 2024, and you can get involved in a campaign.
I have challenged myself to get very involved this election cycle, phone banking, text banking, writing letters to voters. I actually ended up mailing out over 200 letters to voters across the country.
Regardless of my candidate, whether my candidate wins or loses, I plan to stay involved by supporting the nonprofit sector.
Right after the election, we are probably all going to have to be doing ballot curing, which is going to be like chasing ballot, like running and like getting people whose ballots have been like discredited. They can come back and figure out how they can get their vote counted.
I know personally I'm going to continue to protest and advocate for my own rights and the rights of others. I think that continuing to donate, sign other petitions, anything you can do to stay socially active, I think should be a continuity throughout this election.
I would hope that our community could and would continue to act with kindness towards each other, that regardless of the results, we continue to have civil discussions, we continue to invest in each other and in our community, and that we continue to learn from each other's experiences.
As far as how the community is going to react, I'm not hopeful about that. I think it won't matter if Biden wins or if Trump wins, that there will be violence in the streets.
My hope is that our community stays engaged, stays active, and stays connected and listens.
For me personally, I will be continuing to fight for equity in whichever community I end up in. When I graduate, when I go to college, if there are voices that need to be amplified, I will continue my work to create a more equitable environment.
Democracy is not a spectator sport. It's not a thing you just vote every 2 or 4 years. It's being engaged, it's pressuring my representatives, it's getting involved in local issues that matter to me.
2020 actually marks the first year where I am a first-time voter for a presidential election. And what I've learned the most at my time here at Marlborough thus far is that it's never too late to be informed, to use your voice, and to know that your vote counts.
And I believe that people need to start taking action now instead of deferring it to the future. And the best way to take action in this moment is to vote.
This is interesting, especially because the hope is that we're going off to college and soon we're going to be able to start voting on our own. So even if we weren't able to, both of us are 17, even if we weren't able to vote in this election, keeping on staying engaged in local politics and voting whenever and wherever we can is important as our civic responsibility.
Can you guys vote?
No, I'm still 17.
Oh.
Subi, you got to vote. That's exciting. I know that most of you watching this, if you're students, you're not able to vote. Though you don't have a vote, you do have a voice, and that's always worth repeating. But you know who does have a vote, but who didn't 4 years ago? Some of our recent alumni.
Hi Marlborough. 4 years ago this week, I stood in Caswell, where I bet a lot of you wish you could be assembled together in person today, to speak at the ASM that was held about the last election in 2016. That day, the ASM, and the election all feel far away in my memory, and a lot has changed since then. In this election, I'm voting on the side of science, and that means using my vote to support not only the communities of medical experts and scientists who are currently hard at work managing our pandemic, but supporting climate science too. Climate change and issues of environmental legislation are among the most important facing our country and our world today. And if the candidate who is on the side of science that I'm supporting isn't elected, I plan to continue to attempt to make change in my own community and my own backyard, both literal and figurative, around issues of sustainability and environmental justice. And I hope you all do too.
Hi Marlborough, I'm Julie, class of 2018.
And I'm Kelsey, class of 2018.
We're very honored to receive an email from Mr. Allen asking us some questions. So the first one is, what is one issue we care very much about? I have an older sister named Gina who has severe autism, and she has not been given access to great care and opportunities. And I really want the next president, whoever it is, to prioritize that, because it's really important to advocate for our most vulnerable population, even though they may not be able to have a voice for themselves to do so.
And for me, I think I'm really concerned about what the future holds on the influence of big tech in our lives. And I hope whichever candidate wins puts, a priority on thinking critically about how we're able to put parameters around these big companies, on their influence on our purchasing decisions, and making sure that we're really protecting mental health and the freedom of information ahead of, corporate profits.
Hi, Marlborough. Besides the racism and other forms of bigotry that plague the U.S., I think the biggest issue this election is healthcare, especially with us being in the middle of a pandemic. So after the election, I'm really curious to see how COVID-19 is going to be handled.
For me, probably the most important issue this election is definitely going to have to be the issue of affirmative action. One, because there is so much misinformation and a lack of education around what the policy really does. And two, because it directly affects people like me, as well as other more disadvantaged minority groups like Black people and Indigenous people.
I believe that we need to elect a leader who takes guidelines seriously and enacts
laws that will help us defeat this virus that has killed so many Americans and people around the world, a number that I cannot truly comprehend.
So if I had to pick one issue, though there are definitely a lot of issues that matter to me, I would say reproductive justice is probably the biggest issue for me. I just feel that women and people with reproductive parts have the right to choose what to do with their own bodies, and that's not up to the government to decide. And so I hope that whoever is elected will continue to protect reproductive rights for people with reproductive parts. It's just as simple as that.
It's crazy to think that after all of those history lessons on the 19th Amendment and Roe v. Wade, that so much progress could be so quickly overturned.
For me, the most important issue has always been climate change. And voting for the candidate who believes in climate change and who's going to take the steps to address it.
While Black lives have always mattered, my classes this year in college have showed me how race is entangled in all of our institutions and systems, including health, education, and crime.
I want to vote in an administration that listens to scientists and faces the reality that our planet and all the life it holds is in serious danger if we do not start implementing solutions to heal our climate now.
I plan on staying actively engaged and up to date on both foreign and domestic affairs, because if the past 4 years and specifically this last summer has taught us anything, it's that we have to hold our leaders accountable, and we can't do that unless we're properly informed. And my biggest mission moving forward is going to be to focus on local leadership, because that's where it starts.
As Kelsey knows, I've had a huge political awakening in recent months where I've realized that a lot of what I've learned in high school and college in my home it has been one-sided and very different from how a lot of people feel, and I've really tried to understand those viewpoints. I'm taking a libertarian economics class this semester, and I just want to continue to understand why people have values and views that are different from my own and come to accept them.
And for me, I think I'm putting a premium really on reading and putting emphasis on reading about things that I haven't been exposed to in school and taking responsibility for the issues that I haven't been exposed to, because you're only, as educated as you take responsibility for. And so I just think it's really important to continue that education beyond the classroom.
Good Marlborough answer on that.
So I got to vote in this election, but I plan to protest whichever administration takes office, albeit for different reasons. On top of that, I do some grassroots political organizing and GOTV stuff, so that's not going to stop after the election, regardless of who wins. I just plan to shift my efforts towards local races, which are still ongoing and which are very consequential.
I am also going to push for the end of disinformation that fuels a lot of really horrible things on both sides, even though Facebook and Twitter have promised to end a lot of misinformation on their news websites. They're just not able to do that, and the only way you can really do that is going out and talking with the people who believe in those ideas.
I've also been trying to have a lot of constructive conversations with a variety of other people with different views, just to try to broaden my mindset, and that's something I hope to continue after the election regardless of the outcome.
That's been one of the most exciting parts of college so far, is getting to meet people with different opinions than I have, and I think that's a really important aspect of the day-to-day work of civic engagement as well.
I go to college in a red state, and the fact that I don't align with a big majority of elected officials in my state has taught me that the local government has a much bigger influence on daily life than I ever realized, and I definitely think that's something I took for granted living in Los Angeles.
I don't view the election as the end, I view it as the beginning. I think regardless of who wins, we have a lot of work to do in this country.
I think it's important to remind myself that even if the candidate that I vote for wins, is not a signal that, the fight is over and that I can sit down. I think rather it's a signal that this advocacy is working and that, we cannot lose that momentum.
We love you, Marlborough. We miss you. Mwah.
Bye.
Bye.
It's so wonderful to see our young alumni and to see that they're still so active in their communities. Thank you for taking the time to submit your videos to us. We really, really appreciate it. And to find out that more than a few of our alumni are majoring in history. Yes, exciting. If you've been paying attention to this video, students past and present are illustrating Marlborough's new vision statement, Equity Leads Education. And although it's new, it's a statement that we can all, as a community, support wholeheartedly. All right, that's it, Marlborough. Tomorrow's the big day. That's the end of our ASM. So let the takeaway be this. No matter what you're doing tomorrow, no matter how you're going to be spending your time tomorrow night, whether it's sitting on a couch with a bucket of popcorn watching the votes come in, or turning the TVs off and doing a puzzle with your family, please be good to yourself. Take care, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Yeah, first and foremost, History Department. Thank you so much for putting together this election ASM. It was wonderful. Students and faculty who responded to the questions, thank you guys. That video was awesome. And lastly, seniors, November 1st is over, so pat yourselves on the back, go take a nap, and get ready for the week. Everybody else, I hope that you have a wonderful Monday, and I hope that your week is super chill and super relaxed. I will see you guys next Monday. Bye!